improve things. Of course, they did fix things and patch certain stuff, but they basically let the exploits become features. Features that only exacerbated the issue. To be fair, the foundations were probably a bit too shaky to patch stuff without potentially changing the entire thing. Sometimes a complete rework is needed. However, with that being said, exploits like the reverse overhead or the rainbow drag, which is a very classic example, could have at least been tackled in some way. It's a move where you turn your back to the opponent during the windup of an overhead to apply near instant damage on release. Although it was admittedly a satisfying thing to pull off, it wasn't favoured by many and only confused or broke immersion for new players. The lack of communication that came with this, or the inaction to remedy key issues that were clearly contributing to the downfall of the game, ultimately began to create resentment towards Tornbanner. About 10 months after release, Tornbanner had something special to announce. The Deadliest Warrior DLC, where knights, Vikings, samurai, ninjas, Spartans, and pirates fight to the end. This was a really cool collaboration project with Spike TV's Deadliest Warrior series. If you've not seen the show, then you've definitely seen this clip. It was a show that blessed us all with what if Genghis Khan faced Hannibal, or if a Viking fought a samurai, or even just Mafia versus Yakuza. The fact that they took on the IP to make a DLC where notable warriors from different time periods and settings go head to head was genuinely awesome. Unfortunately though, it wasn't that well received. There was a different pace to combat, the night class didn't feel anything like the base game, and balancing was a bit of a miss. But many people, like myself, loved it for what it was, a fun vacation from the main game. It wasn't the most original concept. Pirates, Vikings, and knights has been around for a while, and it's not the first time where Spike TV worked with developers to make a game using their IP. It also didn't take off as anything more successful than Medieval Warfare, but definitely tested the waters for where things could go, if things would go anywhere at all, which they didn't. As fun as it was to be ninja and miss a shot as a pirate knowing full well you didn't have enough time to reload before your shivers get timbered, this DLC split an already shrinking community. It was basically its own separate game with its own separate servers. But the sad part about it is that Tornbanner realised this, made a choice to stick with Medieval Warfare, and never properly communicated when support for Deadliest Warrior would end. It wasn't a standalone either. You had to own Medieval Warfare to even play it, so the barrier to entry on a financial level was also a drawback. Even today, with nobody online, they could drop the game, but never the price. This was a very successful game, and they made a lot of sales. But in the process, something quite important was lost. The decline can be illustrated in one image. The Chivalry crossover with Dying Light, posted on the 6th of December 2019, well after its unofficial death. The irony that their last crossover was with a title quite literally called Dying Light is insane to say the least. But there are multiple layers to what went wrong between release and this unfortunate crossover. The surface level issues at a glance come down to two primary things: the lack of original content and cosmetics over concern. While they did add their own content, one complaint is that it wasn't in great supply. Everyone has their favourite map, but over time, even that gets old. And looking back, one could argue that it was the community that carried the way when it came to additional content. As with the release of their SDK, those with a passion and skill to make mods provided for some really cool content. I mean, I'll never forget the first time I joined a Star Wars server. That was insane. Probably some of the most fun I've had in a game since. One thing that became very apparent was the talent within the modding space, so it was no surprise that Tornbanner decided to host a competition for more content. The Fortification Team Objective Map Contest. This was a partnering between Tornbanner, Steam, Nvidia, Logitech, and Foreshadowing to bring talent together to design and create new maps that could later be added to the game, with of course the chance to win prize money as well as some additional products. In the end, it provided us players with 5 cool new maps, and I remember this event in particular bringing a lot of people back at the time. It was really nice to not only have a new set of environments to play in, but also nice to know that this was community-made content. To play devil's advocate, working hard to create core content with no guarantee that you'll be paid or compensated did seem a bit cheap. You're basically getting a whole bunch of free concepts to pick and choose from, rather than going through the typical process. But without trying to bring it down too much, it did seem to go well. The point here, however, is that not much else was coming from in-house development. Even the store was mostly community-driven, and this was a sign that the foot was off the pedal. You've already seen one of the crossovers, but crossovers did become their own sort of comedy and revealed the frustration many people had for where this game was going. Chivalry had its fair share of cosmetics, from seasonal to things you can earn and things you can buy. But it wasn't until the 1st of May 2015 when they started doing crossover content. The first was with Depth, a unique indie game of its time where you team up with other divers against a shark while trying to loot some treasure. It's a well-respected game that has a really cool concept. The crossover was also quite sensible and well-received. In Chivalry, you'd get a shark-themed helmet and a weapon skin, and in Depth, you'd get a couple medieval skins too. What I quite liked about this one is that for Depth, they replicated the hilltop map, but put it underwater. Seems like a win-win all round. Both games are pretty cool, can share an audience, and players get something in return. A bit later in August, the Killing Floor 2 crossover was announced, then released in September, where if you owned both games, you would get some fleshy zombified weapons in Chivalry and a knight character in Killing Floor 2. But what I think confused most people was the Rocket League crossover. This one was only announced 6 days after the Killing Floor 2 announcement, and thankfully it was just emblems. But already people could see what was going on. Tom Banner caught the flu of cross-promotion madness. Already there were core issues not being addressed, and it started to look like they were grabbing the bag before dipping out. I mean, the cherry on top for some was the Payday 2 crossover that was announced only 2 days after the Killing Floor 2 crossover. I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't much of a surprise with how much stuff was added to that game, and I'll be honest, the night class in Payday 2 was fun to play, but by this point, an already sour taste started to become bitter. But if that feeling wasn't too great for PC, then let's take a moment to think about the console players. It was ported to 4 consoles in total across 2 generations in the following release order. And in summary, it was still a fun game, just a bad port. Whatever flaws and jank were on PC also came to console. There was also no crossplay, so of course standards over time split between platforms. And overall, the experience was significantly less enjoyable by comparison. Due to tech limitations, matches were smaller scale, capping at 24 players as opposed to PC with 40 to 60. The large-scale maps built for greater numbers on PC made online matches on console feel more hollow. But the thing that seemed to ruin it for most people were the server issues. If you weren't hosting the match, lagging connectivity would be your main enemy. It's insane to look back at old reviews and see this in action. I think what sucked the most is that those on console, just like on PC, saw great potential, but due to Torn Banner's growing inactivity, never saw much hope for a future. Communication in general wasn't too great, and reassurance for if there would ever be anything like this again just wasn't really there. When it comes to the heart of it, the lack of communication, the lack of polish, and a failure to act upon what was driving players away ultimately accelerated the decline. Of course, there's the natural aging process, but things could have been better, and they know that. Typically, this part of the video is finding evidence to back a point, but not much is needed when they admit to their own failings. Similar to Age of Chivalry, Steve Piggott made a post reflecting on what went right and what went wrong. What went right in a nutshell was the game itself and the unique experience it provided. Nobody can say it's a terrible game or a perfect one either. There was just nothing else like it at the time. This was genuinely a great game, and the frustration came from a place of seeing what you love turn to dust without a promise of any future. And in their retrospective, they admit to the issues that caused this feeling. Poor communication. They struggled to navigate the relationship with the community, failed to communicate the rationale behind changes, and went for long stretches without a sound. There was this fear of starting drama, seen before in Age of Chivalry, and arguably to a larger scale here. To be fair, it's not like they didn't try to interact and create a healthy relationship. It's just that the avoidance on certain issues caused resentment either way. They knew that they could have done better to explain the combat system in more depth within the onboarding process, and admitted that the low-ranked servers were a band-aid solution. They underestimated the issues that came with being able to drag your weapon, and the formation of exploits that came from this was admitted to be something that they should have fixed. When you look at it, you can see that this game was another step in unknown territory. This subgenre was new, and so were the unique challenges that came with it. Challenges that could have been better addressed. By 2015, it was already showing its age, and real change would likely require a complete rework. When that becomes the question, the solution is usually something new. They were working on something during 2015, but unfortunately, by this point, the damage was already done. And even after admitting to their mistakes, praise was now given to their new competitor. 2015 was a turning point for the PvP melee slasher scene. Mordhau wasn't yet a thing, but its predecessor, quite simply known as Project Slasher, was. And was also in the process of early development. Everyone by this point basically wanted a Chivalry 2, but unfortunately that wasn't in Tornbanner's best interest at the time, because before Project Slasher could become anything more than a test level, a massive flop was in the process. This is Mirage Arcane Warfare, and it was the self-proclaimed spiritual successor to Chivalry. Immediately you can see the contrast in aesthetics. From a dark, gritty medieval world to a magical Arabian Nights Persian-themed wonderland. It's a genuinely beautiful art style with the purpose to improve readability for what is essentially Chivalry, but also magic. Development likely started soon after Chivalry's release, and although it's not easy to pin down exactly when, the crossovers make a bit more sense now. The melee slasher combat system was very much there, but alongside it was also magic and a sense of verticality. There were 6 classes and each of them had their own unique set of abilities. Although Chivalry had their own unique classes, here it was clearly geared more towards forming synergy between the team rather than just picking what you vibed with the most. Team objective was smaller scale to support this, and it doesn't take a genius to see where the Overwatch comparisons came from. The mix of magic and melee added many possibilities when it came to combat. It was a cool concept, but one that naturally struggled against a more familiar format. If you're looking for a competitive game to get into, is it easier to jump into an FPS that you already understand, or jump into a game with a very different combat system to what you're used to? The only people who already understood the melee combat system side of things were the Chivalry players, but this to many, including myself, was an unexpected surprise. It seemed like a fun game to play, and those who found their place with it enjoyed the ride. It was just something a bit too different to its own benefit and to the dismay of those who again just wanted Chivalry 2. I'd never wish for hard work to go down the drain, but unfortunately for this, it really did. From announcement in March 2016 to its release in May 2017 and ultimately its removal from Steam in May 2018, it was a surprisingly quick and quite consistent run. Part of the reason for its removal comes down to the GDPR compliancy issue. I'm not going to turn this into a GDPR lesson, but it stands for General Data Protection Regulation. It's an EU law with mandatory rules for how organizations and companies must use personal data in an integrity-friendly way. Basically, if you weren't GDPR compliant by the time this regulation came into effect, you were about to get EU'd. According to this, they ran out of options for keeping Mirage alive, and the hard truth is that it wasn't a successful game. The player count struggled, the sales were low, and even with a free weekend, it couldn't sustain much popularity. It'll come up again later, but by this point, they were already working on Chivalry 2 and had secured funding from Epic Games. This wasn't just a loss of product, but also a loss of time, as they had to act fast because competition in the medieval combat space was closing in fast. To many people, Mordhau was basically Chivalry 2. Updated graphics, refined mechanics, and even more slapstick. What went wrong with Mordhau is unfortunately a similar story in an arguably more frustrating way, and there's a reason why you'll see this image floating around every now and then. What makes Mordhau interesting is that it was the natural evolution of this type of game. It was made primarily by Chivalry fans from the competitive scene, and with that came an acceptance and appreciation for the complexity behind the combat system. Marco Grigorovich was the pioneer behind this, and you'd be mistaken in thinking that he was some kind of full-time dev just giving this a shot. Apparently, he wasn't, and most of the team lacked any real background in development prior to this. A lot of this was driven by the love for Chivalry medieval warfare, but also in spite of it. There was this aspiration and desire to fix what didn't work and bring the genre forward. Even when this was just a simple Unity proof of concept, people could already see that it had great potential. During 2015, it was remade on Unreal Engine 4 and renamed to Mordhau, with their first devlog post on YouTube in December that year. The group behind it fell under the banner of Triturnion, and now things started to look real.
And they say Chivalry's dead!
As we already know, Chivalry had its issues with readability thanks to the inherent jank that comes with dragging attacks and, by extension, the ability to exploit. So naturally, the key focus with Mordhau was to improve readability, keep fights more face-to-face, and maintain a greater sense of fluidity as well as legitimacy. Just like in Chivalry, you can stab, swing, and overhead. You can also feint, parry, and kick. But instead of just copying Chivalry's combat system and calling it a day, they built upon it. Firstly, you can angle where the attack comes from depending on where you aim. You can also morph attacks, which is basically changing the initial attack to another within its wind-up. If you were to attack immediately after a successful parry, you'll perform a riposte. Instead of just parrying, you can also mirror your opponent's attack to chamber through and change the initiative. It's a higher skilled move, but adds more flavor to combat with zero cost to your stamina. This game is called Mordhau for a reason. The ability to change how you hold your weapon was a unique selling point that brought more to the table.
What the hell was that? It like...
Adds more flavor to combat with zero cost to your stamina.
Gaming monitors.
This game is called Mordhau for a reason. The ability to change how you hold your weapon was a unique selling point that brought more to the table than just hold sword by the handle. A sharp blade may be better against lighter armor, but the Mordhau grip, where you hold the blade, provides a great blunt force alternative against heavier armor. Customizability was a big draw for many people. The concept of this game is that you play as a hired mercenary. You're then paid gold based on your performance and attendance. Gold that can be spent on a store full of many weapons, armor, and equipment. Instead of fixed classes, you make your own. You're given a set amount of loadout points, and each item or perk costs a certain amount. This, in a nutshell, provided a lot of freedom, but also allowed for some balance. If you want to run around in heavy armor to tank more hits, but also want to swing along halberds, nice, but you're slower, have no perks, band-aids, or throwables. If you want to be a half-naked man, go for it. You're now faster, you can hold more stuff, even more perks, but you better be good at the game, because... yeah. The game was great at marketing itself. It looked fun, you had the freedom to mess about, and who wouldn't want to give the funny medieval game a go after seeing that you can gain immunity as a bard? What Mordhau had to offer was very good, and if evidence was ever needed for how much hype this game had, the Kickstarter sitting at around $300,000 with one God Emperor supporter is definitely an example. This Kickstarter was from March 2017. They broke well past their goal and managed to hit their stretch goal of competitive matchmaking for 1v1 and 3v3 duels. The whole point of this was to simply work full-time on the project and deliver something more polished. When the game finally released on the 29th of April 2019, they weren't quite prepared for the turnout. With over 60,000 players, a peak they'll never reach again, they had to ask their provider for all available servers. And with that, learned very quickly that fixing issues under pressure whilst also maintaining customer service isn't easy. The general reception of the game was good. If people didn't already love it for the brutal combat, they loved it for the comedy. And content around it was, as you can see, pure gold. Yes, there were noob lobbies, and Chivalry pros did have the edge, but everyone was still figuring things out together. It was a fairly equal playing field, until of course, it wasn't. There are a few overarching things that contribute to the fall of Mordhau: accessibility, content, and apathy. If you've seen any The State of or What Happened To style of videos for Mordhau, accessibility comes up every time. It's an issue that every person I've had the privilege to talk to brought up as well, and it appears to be the main reason why the player count would die quickly after a free weekend or some kind of content update. But if this was made by Chivalry players, and Chivalry clearly struggled with this, then how on earth did Mordhau? Well, one thing to remember is that this game was made by competitive players who still wanted there to be a skill curve to climb. And they developed a combat system that was admittedly built for more intimate fights. A lot of what was advertised were duels, and whenever it was a large skirmish, it seemed kind of clean, but in reality, things get chaotic pretty quick. With a deeper combat system, complexity is difficult to understand in the heat of the moment. moment. Simply put, there's more to learn, more to put into muscle memory, and with the natural optimization of how best to use said combat system, those who got good got very good by comparison to those just starting out. And as a result, I'd argue that Mordhau's skill gap grew much larger than Chivalry's. But unfortunately, similar to Tallbanner, Triturnion didn't do much, if anything, to bridge that gap. So as the player count shrank, the density of more dedicated and experienced players intensified. Although still a fun game with many hours well worth playing, this decreased the likelihood of new players sticking around as they found themselves in the deep end, with a mountain to climb and not much in-game to help. The onboarding process is a crucial step in building a relationship between the game and a new player. It's a process that provides an understanding between the objectives, mechanics, and systems in place so that said new player can get involved without feeling helpless or confused. While this is done passively and sometimes taken to the extreme, a tutorial is usually the first introduction. Mordhau has a tutorial, it's okay and it serves its purpose, but doesn't go any further than surface level concepts. They don't even show you how to actually drag your weapon. The concept is mentioned and shown by the instructor, but that's all the depth you're gonna get. This is such a core concept that you need to learn early on, and I'm looking at this as of today. There's no real training ground or test level to practice well-known moves or anything to actually teach the player how to get to that higher level of skill. There's no visible path to progression. Did you know that this game has a turn cap, that when you attack, your sensitivity, including DPI, doesn't even need to be that high? Because even if you can turn 100 times per second, that doesn't change the speed of your attack. Well, we won't tell you that, and as a result, you may suffer more than those who turn their default sensitivity down because, unlike a shooter, it doesn't need to be that high. Did you know that many medium to pro players don't even use anything close to the default keybinds, or bother to angle their attacks using their aim? That there are just some more straight up optimal ways to play? Well, you may assume so, but that's subjective, and we won't recommend any layout options to help you maybe get on the same page or just even try something that may better suit you. No, you can figure that out yourself. These are just some basic things that I learned after trying out some coaching with Stouty, a prominent voice in the community who's been around since Chivalry. In fact, one of the first things we did was just go through my settings, and immediately I noticed that I was playing better than I ever did before. Obviously not that great, 26-0 to a naked man, better than I ever did before. Obviously not that great, 26-0 to a naked man. But it became very clear to me in this moment that it's the game itself that feels like it's hiding information from you. All the training tab has is a 15-minute tutorial, that's it. The rest is on the community to provide guides, and even though they made one of their own, there's no link to it anywhere. As playtimes increase, the gap between introductory and pro gets wider, and Triturnion basically left the bridge building to the community. The content situation on the surface isn't as wild as what happened with Chivalry's crossovers. The main complaint, however, is that there wasn't much new content, and what did come out took too long. Sounds like me. But looking into the content development itself reveals a deeper line as to what went wrong. In a nutshell, Triturnion's focus for new content was geared more towards large-scale team objective. And no matter what they released, they never properly addressed the growing skill gap. These games have two types of players: those who just want to jump into a big battle without much to think about, and those who vie for more competitive play. For simplicity's sake, I'll split these two into casual and competitive. Neither is an indication of actual skill or level. We're looking into preference of game modes and how Triturnion managed to alienate one side while trying to accommodate for another. Casual players like myself are attracted to big battles because the pressure for the individual player is spread much thinner. You charge in, maybe get a kill or two, and then a nice view of your hand. It feels like the blame is less on you and more so the chaos of the situation. The intensity is there, you will get outplayed, but you don't have to be a pro to do it right. Those two players find themselves here. It's the big draw and the big selling point. But a problem from the very start was the lack of any skill-based matchmaking. Without it, the skill gap grew pretty quick, considering also that Chivalry veterans were already accustomed to the core combat system. While this applies to everyone, casual players who took a break would come back to a game where the bar to compete was unanimously raised. For new players, it was a deep end, but for anyone coming back to check out new content, it was a game of catch-up against those with hours far beyond your reach.
This is my problem with directional combat. I didn't spend the last, fucking 2, 5, 10. Well, it has been 2 years now on Mortal, but like I didn't spend the last 10 years learning Mortal, and I don't want to. I don't think directional combat's that good compared to like even New World. Even compared to New World, it sucks. And like, so I'm like, I look at this and I'm like, sure, it's skill based towards what end?
It's not that the new content
Towards what
bad.
end? I mean, I don't know. Like sure, it's skill-based combat, and you feel really good when you kill somebody in PvP and all that. But like, I don't want to be a master at this combat. I don't think it's particularly good.
Or jumping
I hate
back
to
in
say
or
it, but I think
something.
New World
It's
is superior even in the PvP.
just that they simply created content that would appeal more so to new and casual players without also considering the player experience from onboarding to returning. Just to throw it in there, there's no anti-cheat, or never was to my knowledge, or DDoS protection, so add that into the mix.
Wow, there's
Obviously,
no
skill-based
anti-cheat and no DDoS. That's insane. There's no anti-cheat at all. That sounds like a garbage cesspit.
matchmaking on its own wouldn't have stopped
Fuck Mordau then.
the gradual decline, but may have helped to keep the game a bit more alive for longer. If it was implemented today, it would just split an already small player base. Competitive players are the type of people who can feel the changing tick rate of the server with every refund caused by the swing of their sword. These are the more involved players within the community who vie for a higher stakes challenge and mastery of the combat system. Dueling and intense smaller scale fights appeal more to this type of player. 1v1 and 3v3 ranked duels are the only game modes to accommodate for this. And unfortunately both were released quite late in development as part of their stretch goal. But that's all there is. It didn't even occur to me that these game modes have their own skill-based matchmaking till watching Dosh Doshington's post-mortem analysis. The game modes themselves are rather dry in the way that it's quite literally just fighting in an open arena. Earning a rank is cool, but minus private servers, that's all the game really offers for the competitive scene. There's no 5v5 hardcore team objective mode where you have to rely on team synergy to, I don't know, secure the bomb.
Oh, I'm out of aluminum.
The end game is basically one of two things: achieve a high rank and or become a demigod on the battlefield. A demigod that over time must eventually face other demigods while mere mortals count their fingers. So of course when new large-scale team objective content is released, yes, there'll be new players, especially if there's a sale, but obviously everyone else is going to join in to check it out, including those from the competitive scene, because what else is there new to do? Some new players may stick around, however, most will leave after realizing that getting to a similar level of skill just to have a chance.
It's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. For what? For a game that dies? Or what? I mean, like, what? It's not a game that you can live in or have a base in, or like Mortal where it has a point. I don't know. I've got a lot of real issues with it. I couldn't do anything to this thing. Fuck. I was hoping for at least a sight. This thing doesn't even have a sight. That's so dumb. Why doesn't this thing have a sight? That's so dumb. Well, it's still a really good weapon.
Requires a lot more effort than they initially expected. You can say get good all you want, but the truth is that most people can't be asked.
Yeah, I mean most people really can't be asked. Yeah, I will not go up against these people and try and get good like them like this in this game. The game's not good enough. In New World, I think I kind of did. In New World, I feel like I can contend with the big boys, yeah. But not Mortal. The game just wasn't good enough. Not like Mortal or any of these games. Like, I played Chivalry 2. I own Chivalry 2. On the PlayStation.
Agree.
Or I did. I gave that away.
In a comment by the CEO posted not too long after the game's release, it's confessed that this was basically a game built for slower, smaller scale fights, rather than larger, chaotic battles. But they switched focus to larger scale and caused an identity crisis. Even though they understood this, there was never a change in this direction, as I guess it seemed like the hole was already dug too deep. So yeah, basically a game made by competitive players for smaller scale skirmishes that was scaled up and ultimately attracted an audience that they didn't accommodate for, while also not really accommodating for the audience that stuck around. The most recent content update is Demon Horde, a co-op zombies-like experience, which on its own is actually pretty fun. This has always been considered a PvP-first game with PvE options, and as cool as this is, you can't help but feel that it's a contingency plan for when the player count finally hits the floor. If demand for something isn't met, then the community can step in to provide mods. But that requires modding support that didn't arrive until over 2.5 years after launch. While it wasn't impossible to make mods without this support, a healthy modding community is quite difficult to establish well after its prime. What I heard from people deeper in this side of the community is that when modding support actually arrived, it ironically broke compatibility with existing mods, making it less so support and more like a pain in the ass. It's also worth mentioning that the in-game mod downloader, which is basically the only way you can download mods, is very slow regardless of how fast the internet speed is. So not only did this not help the community, but also left a lot of people sitting there waiting for their favorite servers to be fixed, only to wait longer to re-download the mods. Due to how slow it was, mods had to be limited in scope to reduce size, only adding further limitations. The whole purpose of modding is to give the community an opportunity to bring to life ideas that would otherwise never be tried by development. Yet here, it just wasn't great. The issues with accessibility, the identity crisis that ignored the player experience, and the reluctance to bridge the skill gap pretty much explains why the player count never saw growth. But it's also worth considering the topic of toxicity. Outside of the odd shit talk, it's a fact of life that PvP games can foster toxicity that can go too far. There are levels to it, and it's always subjective as to how much each level impacts a player. Some people care a lot, some people don't, and some people thrive on it. With melee slashes being such a visceral face-to-face experience where you can see your ass getting handed to you, where egos are formed and challenged, most will agree that there needs to be some barriers set in place. Focusing on just the in-game experience here, Triturion didn't account for much. For a good while, there are no basic filters for chats, there are no options in-game to report, and some server names. Yeah, games can earn reputations, and regardless of opinion, that can have an impact on the customer's decision, whether it be before or after a purchase.
It can, and it does.
As a small team, only made it harder for themselves by not preparing for
look at these children playing this fucking shitty game that I'm supposed to like, but they treat it like garbage.
Like back in the day, then you
like Russ was kind of like that. It's like, look at these fucking man children on this game, like they mistreat me all the fucking time. Why should I play with these fucking assholes? How is this guy dead? Oh, it's just RP. She's killing like the whole party. Works for me. What was that? I shot him point blank in the chest 4 times. Okay. Oh my god, I have to start over. Oh. You didn't save or whatever? You don't have an autosave here at all? I thought I at least saved when I got there. No? I guess not. Why are we going the wrong way? Turn, damn it.
Seeing this montage of Kiryu turning what was meant to be a serious tournament into pure content, running around with a pan,
Swear to God, I
winning
saved.
fights with a training sword. It was funny as hell and brought so many new eyes to the game. Along with other examples, it promoted it for what it was. A game where you can get so good that you can mess about with money on the line and win by throwing rocks. But it wasn't taken that way by Triternion. There was this sour taste towards the idea of potentially supporting that behavior. There was the opportunity to capitalize, generate further exposure through content made about it, but they decided not to take that opportunity or invest further into the competitive scene, leaving another thing for the community to carry. Crush is a prominent name you'll see thrown around. He was one of the developers, and one could say that he was a red-blooded chivalry player.
What's worth? Is it worth 100 players leaving, but 100 players buying the game?
I think you should eat some broccolis to raise your testosterone.
Okay, honestly though, are you gonna answer the question? Do you think 100 new players is better than losing 100?
You sound like the dog in your picture.
Played a large part in the balancing side of things, and of course, this is playing when there were sometimes genuine disagreements, and for better or worse, it would be Crush backing the decisions. There was this sentiment that if he or other developers weren't good with a certain weapon, then it's going to get balanced. And there's a lot of flack towards this dev in particular for multiple reasons. Justified or not, fact or fiction, the truth is that he was eventually the only one facing the crowd. At some point, the other developers went silent, and the only way for the core community to get through to development was via Crush. The impression given was that the other developers switched off and only wanted to focus on their own set-in-stone checklist. Community concerns be damned. There was an arrogance to communication. It felt like they figured everything out and did all that needed to be done. That anything else would be pointless, that this is just how things go. The game gets old, the player base drops, and pros scare away new players whenever content is added. And that's just how it is. In reality, this was a small team of first-time developers releasing their first game, but what makes this story frustrating for some is that Chivalry was the example to go by for what to do and what not to do. However, they only managed to replicate the lack of communication, the alienation, and avoided core issues that drove players away before it was too late to fix them. It's easy to get heated about it, but what Triternion did well is bring the genre forward by innovating the combat system and inspiring others to take their own path, even though that may be out of frustration for what wasn't done. Mordhau isn't a terrible game, and you can still have a lot of fun with it. Is there a future for it? Nah, probably not. It was a game that started off with a lot of promise, but was ultimately not steered in the best direction. The scale of failure with Mirage was total, and to be honest, without it, Chivalry 2 probably wouldn't have come out the way it did. Because after such a failure, Tornbanner had to reassess themselves, take on the fact that things went really wrong, and that they had to change the way they were doing things. They've always been a fairly small team, and going from mostly modders to on-site developers working on something different came with its own set of challenges. Challenges that had to be faced at some point or another as the company grew. As you already know, development began sometime in 2017. It was then later revealed at E3 in June 2019, with of course reception being mixed, as one could assume with Mordhau's prominence at the time, as well as a scarred reputation. It was in October that year when they reflected on what went wrong, and by this point, Mordhau was still going strong. One thing that already put quite a few people off was the Epic Store one-year exclusivity agreement, when the game was set to sit in the Epic Store for about a year before
that's what
moving out to
happened.
other platforms like Steam. The word sellout has been used to describe this, but in all fairness, it did seem that Mirage really took its toll. To make something bigger and better than before, they needed investment. In their own words, they decided to go down this route to take things to a whole new level that wouldn't be possible without this partnership. 2020 was the planned year of release, but as you can imagine, development timelines had to shift in order to achieve scope. But thankfully, they managed to release the game on the 8th of June, 2021. Not only was it released on PC, but also for multiple consoles, each supporting crossplay. And with that came a much wider net that apparently captured 250,000 players within the first first hour. Content creation followed the usual procedure, as a lot of big name creators jumped on it for about a week or so, and largely speaking, this game was a big success for what it was. It introduced a lot of new people to the PvP melee slasher scene that have enjoyed the ride regardless of quite a few bumps. Minus some resentment from the past, heated opinions towards the direction of the game, the way certain things were handled, and community drama that can spark the creation of a 4-hour-long video essay, the game did pretty good. And now it's sitting on retirement support, waiting for a nightmare to pass. There's one thing in particular that Chivalry 2 did quite well, and it's how it lowered the bar to entry. The tutorial will take you through everything you need to know, showing you a video example before getting you to perform the action yourself. You're actually shown how to drag your weapon and why it's important, first on clearly defined targets, then on a test subject. You can see that they wanted you to get the idea in your head. They show you the simple but easy to forget concept of timing your strike while running towards the enemy. Similar to Mordhau, they have counters, which are basically easier chambers where you hold block and quickly respond with the same attack. And yeah, you heard that right. Instead of a timed parry, you can just hold up your weapon to block at the cost of stamina. This on its own is a much more simple concept to grasp, especially for new players. That can still be punished by pros. Again, similar to Mordhau, you can riposte by blocking and attacking straight after. With the consideration of large battles and the likelihood of being outnumbered, a successful riposte can deflect incoming attacks, increasing your survivability and providing the sense that you've got a chance. Overall, I'd say that the Chivalry 2 combat system brings the bar to entry much lower, and that was clearly the aim, because the market is there. But the tricky part is getting people to feel comfortable enough to stay. After the tutorial, you pick your faction and then are thrown into battle against some bots. With this, immediately the player can try out what they've just learned against AI that won't try any advanced techniques. Fighting against bots isn't anything new, neither are offline games, but of course the push makes the difference. There was also more of a push to increase the pace of battle. For example, when you respawn, you're already charging in the direction of the objective. The game is actively leading you to where you need to go. Not to mention that you may join a battle that's just about to start, and from the very beginning are faced with the opponent. Instead of waiting to try and find the enemy, you've got these intro cinematics that kick the game off, which are pretty cool, even if that means you're a simple farmer learning very quickly what an invasion looks like. To keep players in the fight for longer, there's the chance that you can get downed and picked back up again. Visual indicators for successful actions are more visible, and in the heat of combat, that can help. To be fair, it does give a bit more of an arcadey feel to it, but all in all, this is a much easier game to get into for people who are new to this genre. A lower bar to entry doesn't mean that there's no skill curve. There is a competitive scene, there are exploits, and pro players can easily dominate the field. It's just that the skill curve is less steep to start with. Although with all that being said, it is worth mentioning that this game didn't have skill-based matchmaking till much later, and when it did come out, it somehow managed to do the opposite. But overall, they did do better in the accessibility and onboarding department. So then, what actually went wrong with Chivalry 2? Well, to be honest, for the casual player, not too much. But if you zoom in, things get a bit disappointing, and clearly, some old habits die hard. First off, as a small reminder, Tornbanner was still a small team when they started working on Chivalry 2. And as a small team, we can't build that forever game, Lofstrom says in an interview with Rock Paper Shotgun. The intention was never to make something that lasted longer than 3 years, and it's hard not to accept that a large part of what makes these games pop are the first few months when everyone's still a bit fresh before moving on to the next big thing. When it comes to the content side of things, we know that it brings people back.
I don't play games like that.
Sort of engagement.
I don't show up for a brief visit.
More new content throughout the years than what was ever delivered in-house with Chivalry 1. And it wasn't until the 22nd of May 2024 when content development ended. The more you look into the content delivered, the more you can see that they clearly had a defined roadmap that they did achieve, just not at the pace that most would have liked, with actual new content being rather spread out. If a month doesn't feel long to you, then you're old. But playing the same game mode on the same few maps without anything new for a while can take its toll. What can also take its toll are the inherent issues that come with a game that appears to have been rushed in certain areas. Large-scale games, as we already know, are a big draw to games like this, and Chivalry 2 went hard on the 64-player servers. Thankfully, with a more resilient generation of consoles, cross-platform is also possible to this scale. But regardless of hardware, networking issues plagued launch. Desync became a topic of discussion, and matchmaking was a bit broken. As for example, the party system that was meant to let you match with friends just didn't work for a good while, which, as you can imagine, isn't too great on launch, as initial hype only lasts for about a week or so. When it comes to build quality, updates will come with their own set of new bugs, some I've heard coming back from the grave. This wouldn't be much of an issue if things were fixed in a more timely manner. The fact that this game is cross-platform is great, however, to push an update requires attention across all of them. So as you can imagine, this causes delays, and unfortunately the delays themselves would often be vaguely communicated. Cheating and hacking is basically a force of nature, one that requires constant defense. Like when you have to mow the spiky green stuff because it keeps coming back. Chivalry 2 does have anti-cheat, and with that it does require a bit more effort to hack. Maybe money for those more set up on the idea. Apparently North America didn't seem to suffer as much as Europe when it came to hacking and cheating, but it did get pretty bad. Flying about and speed killing the whole server and team objective is annoying for the odd player, but when it comes to the more communal areas, things get a little advanced. On many occasions, hackers would actively join duel yards with the goal just to piss people off. And naturally, they'd get vote kicked. But then things evolved to a point where, if they were kicked, the server would simply crash. And those who voted to kick would be identified and added to a list for the hacker to follow across any available server. It's one of those damned if you don't or damned if you do type situations. And the more prominent the issue becomes, the more effort it is for the average player to stick around. What makes things worse is that when the game came out for Game Pass, anti-cheat just wasn't there. With Game Pass being on PC, you can see where this is going. Easy burner accounts and even easier hacks. Now, Tornbanner did give certain people admin permissions to help moderate, and when an issue like this occurs, part of the banning process is to find the user ID of the hacker, but that's tough to do when the hackers learn how to hide it. It also didn't help that people knew that Tornbanner knew who some of the repeat offenders were, yet never went further than an account ban. If you really wanted to, you could just set up a new account, keep your main account safe, and do a little griefing. And to only make matters worse, Tornbanner, for whatever reason, didn't add private hosting till much later, which is honestly insane to think about. Being able to host a private server was a big part of Chivalry 1 and Mordhau. The ability to host a private server for public use basically comes with its own moderation. If there's a person of the community who just want to jump into a duel yard, then having the ability to lock it off with a passcode only to allow those people who aren't going to hack in, the hackers themselves can't actually get in to cause any trouble. But here's the thing, when they did introduce private servers, it was via their own partnered channel, and that was supposed to have some kind of protection in place, but ultimately it didn't. So imagine spending that much money with no other option, while not only being at the mercy of hackers, but also the odd DDoS campaign. They did eventually add some kind of security, but you can imagine the disappointment from those who just wanted to host a server back when the service came out. The 4-hour-long video essay I mentioned earlier by Rubric goes into more detail about the hacking issue, but ultimately it was a problem that never really saw much resolve. This was never planned to be a forever game, but that doesn't mean that there won't be a forever audience. It's those who stick around who buy the DLC, support the game further, and are probably the only ones who are going to complete the battle passes. They have those in this game as well. It's a common thread now that the more committed fan base take the backseat. While Mordhau wasn't great in this, at least
I can't use my power. I am hammering the power. I can't use it.
Modding support and didn't come out to the heart and play. In fact, on a side tangent, Chivalry 2 has no mod support, just none, which is a massive shame, especially considering where Tornbanner came from. If it wasn't for Half-Life 2 and the ability to make Age of Chivalry, then where would they be today? But similar to Mordhau, most content went towards large-scale team objective, and it was clearly built for that from the start. The main selling point was always the big cinematic battles. However, it's natural by this point that there's a casual side to the player base and a more community-driven, competitive side. And it's when you look into that side, the competitive and social aspect to the game, where you begin to see frustration caused by old habits. I've mentioned it before, but dual yards are something well worth talking about now. The concept of a dual yard is highly social and basically tradition by this point. The idea is simple. You join, you find an opponent, flourish, or do some freaking bowing, and then you have yourself a 1v1. Similar to something like a Dark Souls Fight Club, there's this internet with unwritten rules that form between more involved players. Of course, in these games specifically, there's chat and some servers have clear rules. Breaking said rules or disturbing the peace would basically get you kicked, banned, or focused by the whole server. To accommodate for dueling in Chivalry 2, you basically have two options: unranked matchmaking or the more preferred dual yards, which, as you'll soon see, were clearly not something properly considered within scope. Before private hosting, Chivalry 2 did have public dual yards with one simple rule only found within the name of the server. 1v1 only, flourish at opponent to initiate. And that's it. No rules pop up in game, no unique mechanic to initiate, nothing to stop you from running in and going nuts. I mean, if someone's griefing, it's usually them versus the whole server, and it's not that much of an issue when you can just vote to kick or report, even though the reporting process does require video evidence and probably won't resolve until long after the event. But a large part to sustaining etiquette within these servers came down to simply telling people to check. Understandably, some players may just have no idea what they're doing and need to be told. It was very much community driven in that way. And this is where things get kind of funny, if not quite annoying, because it was a bit of a disaster when cross-platform came to these servers. You see, the only way you could access dual yards was on PC, because console players didn't have access to the server list and were stuck in standard matchmaking. Until, of course, they eventually allowed console players to access the server list, which is a good thing. However, there was a bit of an issue with that, because console players don't have access to chat. So as you can imagine, with a lot of players who aren't familiar with dual servers in the first place, that can cause a bit of confusion. At one point, the game came to PlayStation Plus, and as if the universe itself was having a laugh, a bug came with it that essentially broke the vote-to-kick system. Think about it, a small percentage of PlayStation Plus players is still a lot. And without chat or vote-to-kick, it was apparently a difficult week for duelists. Now, private hosting didn't come into the update in March 2024, about 2 years and 9 months since launch. And this update in particular is quite an interesting turning point for the community side of things. This was basically a handover from Tornbanner to the community to moderate duels and foot the cost. Because if there was ever a problem on these servers, it would have to be sorted out by staff that was apparently quite short supply. With this update came the removal of dual yards or dual servers for what are now social servers, without any flourish to 1v1 rules. Because social servers don't come with this rule, there's no real need to moderate for anything outside of hacking. They're basically just free-for-all matches to, I guess, socialize in. It was basically the death of official dual yards, and the new private hosting service that came with this update looked like a way to cash in on those who wanted to keep that part of the culture going. Additionally, in an ironic way, 3 maps were released with this update, and one of those is called Dual Yard. It's a really cool map with all kinds of things to mess about with, but what would have been cool is to see this come out earlier when public dual yards was still a thing. And you may think to yourself, well, fair enough, it takes time to make new content and maybe this was just poor timing. Well, here's the thing, this map is the same map from the tutorial, the exact same map. When it comes to the community and more competitive side of things, tournaments were mostly community driven and Tornbanner have helped by providing private servers. They have been known to fund some events, and if you're lucky, you can win a peasant hat. When it comes to tournaments specifically, there are a few rabbit holes, but this was never meant to be an esport. However, the drive is there, because as you can see with each game, there's always a competitive scene, and the main reason for even covering that side of the audience is because they are the forever audience, and they are the ones who expose the core issues. One core issue in particular that has burnt quite a few bridges is Tornbanner's new approach to communication. The best way to
No, I think it's other games coming out.
Based on what I've seen and heard is corporate, rather signed off and a bit too curated. It's not like they didn't try to keep people in the loop about major delays or never patched anything, but it seemed like unless the issue was absolutely game-breaking, there wouldn't be much reassurance as to if it would be resolved. I mean, the hacking situation comes up here again because it got pretty bad and was a prominent issue for the core community for a long time. But there was no word from Tornbanner until much later, saying that it's in no uncertain terms that addressing cheaters is their top priority. Now, I'm well aware that this is going to sound very trust me bro, but I've had the privilege to chat with a few people that have been a part of the community who prefer not to be in this video. And based on those conversations, the best way to describe what it was like trying to get Torn Banner to listen was like throwing notes into the void, not quite knowing what will come back. I mean, people wanted private servers for a long time, and then all of a sudden, when it suits them best, they come out with something. It's easy to say developers and forget that they are people with schedules, deadlines, and pressure from above to execute company-approved tasks. But it seemed like not much else besides the next big thing was important enough to address. Unless, of course, it was critical. If you look at the slow pace of updates and the increase in staff, one could assume that there's something else being worked on, something big that is drawing attention away from development. On the 22nd of May 2024, the Regicide update concluded Chivalry 2, marking the official end for content development. And of course, the question on everyone's mind was what's next? Could it be that they were working on Chivalry 3, the Arcane Warfare remaster? Well, no, because of course, this is where that damned quote, that unintentional prophecy, becomes reality. On the 10th of June 2024, No More Room in Hell 2 was announced. And the short story is, it didn't go too well. This is what went wrong with No More Room in Hell 2, so far, the light version. And I'm being a man of my word, stuck on a bus. Interestingly enough, No More Room in Hell 2 shares a similar origin to Chivalry, as it started from a Half-Life 2 mod. One that came out in 2011 and became a free standalone in 2013. A standalone that currently shares a similar player count with the sequel. The general concept that applies to both is zombie survival in the more traditional sense. Each zombie is a legitimate threat that is best avoided. There's always a chance that you'll contract the virus on contact, and when you do, it's a race against time to find the cure or become another threat. There may be the odd runner, but most are slow and they are many. You have limited resources and have to use them wisely. Both the 8-player co-op and working together is crucial for survival, because once you're gone, and the rest must survive without you. It's meant to be a hardcore experience with a heavier lean towards realism and less reliance on UI. The mod is claustrophobic by nature with semi-dynamic environments, and by contrast the sequel is more open world with objectives leading to the center, where the goal is to perform said objectives before safely extracting. A successful extraction means you can keep your randomly generated character and level them up. Losing them is permanent. Lever Games were the original developers, and with limited resources, they're in the process of creating the sequel before the Torn Banner acquisition. Of course, when you think about it with Chivalry 2, things seem to slow down a little bit, or it seemed like their attention was elsewhere, and with the announcement of this, it adds some context as to maybe why. In October 2022, Lever Games mentioned a partnership with a larger studio. They then confirmed in March 2023 that the game had entered full-time development, suggesting that Torn Banner's involvement may have begun in late 2022 or early 2023. There's a post on this with a longer timeline of the development journey itself, as well as more commentary, but in relation to Torn Banner specifically, it's clear that they were at least juggling two things for a good portion of Chivalry 2's roadmap. This information could mean nothing, it could be completely pointless to throw in, but I feel like it gives some context as to why things may have been a bit slow for Chivalry 2, because they already knew when Chivalry 2 was going to end, and this was the new big thing. What went wrong so far with the sequel is a combination of a couple things, one of which being the launch in October 2024, that was quite damaging to its reputation. This is an early access game, and some will use early access as a shield against criticism, but $30 from an experienced studio is asking a lot for how unstable it was. Terrible desync, floating heads, and teleporting zombies are just a few of the issues encountered. Even to this day, some fly and others strike a pose. The harsh reality of early access is that it's still a launch regardless. The initial hype is something hard to get back, and it didn't fill many people with hope. Most won't buy the game until they see significant progress. When you expose the core concept to the world, it will be criticized, and that has a direct impact on sales. Unfortunately, not long after launch, there were some layoffs, as they had to make the difficult decision to undergo a restructure because, as a fully independent, self-funded developer, they were up against many challenges. Apparently, those who were let go received severance packages as well as being able to keep their work computers, but it's hard not to draw a correlation here and see that this may be a sign that things weren't going too smooth with Torn Banner, and they had to adjust to a new financial reality. The second thing is expectations. Taking over an IP with a following full of nostalgia and love for the original is a very risky move, let alone making a sequel to something that already hit the spot. There were of course some reservations about Tornbanner's acquisition of the IP. Will they treat it with care? Will it be done right? Will it be true to the original? While the overall concept wasn't too far from the mod or what was to be expected for the sequel, there were some things missed and elements that weren't present. For example, the infection mechanic was special in the way that you'd basically have to survive on pills till you find a cure, and if you didn't, it would be best to take one for the team. In the sequel, the depth to it just wasn't there, but now, thankfully it is. After playing both the mod and sequel for equal amounts of time, the levels of the mod provide a much more slow and methodical journey. Due to the confined spaces and limited paths, you have to think on your feet because running out of stamina could mean the end very fast. It genuinely felt like there was more purpose to it. Your decisions carried weight on certain mistakes. The end and so did everyone else who took part. In the sequel, that element lingers, but nowhere near as strong with random people. The gameplay loop lacks a deeper meaning to it. It's hard to describe, but the coordination between other survivors is less required here. You'll often find people rushing objectives, as with the current spawn points for zombies, it's more so a race against time than a push through a crowd. It's also worth mentioning that the melee combat is nothing like Chivalry, and it shouldn't be. It replicates the original, it's still satisfying, but there's something to it that feels a bit disconnected. Maybe it's the weird range. Thankfully, playing the game today is a different story in the way that it's much more stable. When you play it, you can see potential. And the good news is, at least looking at it now, is that Tornbanner seems committed to making it better. It has a long way to go, they have a roadmap, and they appear to be listening to community feedback, which admittedly might be hard to hear for some Chivalry veterans. However, one cannot deny that they've put their eggs into a rather shaky basket. Will there ever be a Chivalry 3? Most likely, but it's hard to tell when or how it will turn out if the studio struggles to push forwards. For now, when it comes to melee slashers, the ball is well and truly in the middle. So then, what now? Is this the end of the medieval melee slasher? No, of course not. In fact, I think things are about to get interesting. Regardless of development decisions, there's a natural evolution that comes with any genre. Mordhau was made in spite of Chivalry's unpolished combat system, a combat system that, looking back at it now, was fundamentally flawed and would require a complete rework. Mordhau just turned out to be that rework. Chivalry 2 then took a couple leaves out of Mordhau's book with the combat system and proved that you can lower the bar to entry and still have a fun game with a skill curve to climb. Inspiration is what takes a genre forwards, and forwards is never a straight path, neither should it be. It's the frustration of problems not being solved, things not being explored that push people to go their own way and get creative. And that's where we're at now. Giru, the guy who threw rocks and surfed around in the Twitch Rivals tournament, recently dropped a trailer for Ad Mortem, a dark fantasy PvP and co-op game with scaled down fights to focus more on team synergy. As clearly learned from past experience, skill-based matchmaking on top of an easy-to-pick-up combat system is a priority for the store page. There's Renown, who I personally want to say is the spiritual successor to Reign of Kings, but jokes aside, this game brings the slasher style combat system into the survival setting. It's a step in a different direction, and it seems to fit well. Survival games can be hit or miss, but there's potential to be that forever game without a visual art of feeling positive, dangerous. Thief Game is how it revealed itself very recently, where the focus is on large-scale battles both by land and sea. In this dynamic world, it's a melee slasher by definition, but also includes magic in combat. It's not to the same degree as Mirage, but there is a bit more of a dueling aspect to it. What I'm trying to show here is that this genre is growing. It's those who love the raw nature of the combat system from the games before who are taking it in different directions. It's point blank obvious, but what went wrong in this genre largely came down to development and the poor decisions that followed. More specifically, the inability or inaction to tackle the new challenges unique to games like this. But what went right was also because of the people behind it. There's no telling if any of these projects will succeed. It's guaranteed, however, that each will face challenges that the team behind it may not even be able to resolve because of some unforeseen issues baked into the code. That to fix would essentially mean dismantling the whole thing or spending resources that just aren't there anymore. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned first-person shooters. And if you look at the history of that genre, with the amount of games, the different paths it took, and the evolution as well as the devolution, you can see a long history of mistakes to learn from. It's a part of the process to build upon what came before, and the reality here is that innovation in this space for the longest of time has been slow. But it's nice to stand here to see that the genre you grew up with has some kind of future. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a wicked time, and I'm gonna shamelessly plug the Wicked Wizard channel here because we've got a big video coming out there soon about some funny dinosaur games. It's quite an interesting dumpster dive to say the least. Of course, a massive thanks to all of my supporters. You guys pay for the snacks at the station. Also, thank you to all of those who have given their time to chat about and provide context for the games covered in this video. And finally, a personal shout out to all of my based wizards. Gibbles by the dozen, the Cuddly Bot, Negadan, the one with 7 toes, Abby, the Meatly, Durham Trollfist, Matt MC, Pete Z, Spooky.
In these 9 boxes are contained documents, also pieces of evidence, including this drawing from one of the 3 Avery girls who was killed, Karen Avery, who was 7 at the time of her murder.
Doesn't get more horrific than that.
Seemed to be the best kept secret in town. I still think it is, probably maybe in the nation.
His name was Jeffrey Don Lundgren, a self-proclaimed prophet.
Did you consider him a prophet?
Yes.
The Averys didn't believe, not as they ought, that you would go over the scriptures. If you do not repent, you would be destroyed. And that is in fact what happened.
Today I want to talk about the Kirtland cult and the murders that they committed, because to me it's the part that to me is hard to believe about this case is not that the murders happened, but that the cult leader was able to convince these people to do what they did. Because I don't know how to say this, but it's like he's very basic. It just, I don't get how he was able to get these followers and then to get them to move to live with him and then to get them to do the things they did. I don't know. Once I looked into his backstory, I kind of felt bad for him. Obviously nothing justifies what he did, but it's one of those things where it doesn't justify it, but maybe it explains it a little bit. I don't know. In any case, let me just get into the thing because there's so much I want to tell you. So the whole thing starts on New Year's Eve, 1989, when a man by the name of Keith Johnson, sorry, I struggled with that one, went to the FBI in Kansas City. So Keith tells the FBI, I was part of a cult. And the cult leader, his name is Jeff Lundgren, but we call him Dad. And we all lived together, and 8 months ago, we all participated in a gruesome murders actually. We basically killed an entire family. The father, the mother, the 3 daughters, the youngest whom was 7. And he says that, I left this cult 8 months ago, and, I was afraid, but now I want to come forward. And he drew like a map of where the barn was that the family was buried in. And basically, in the beginning, the FBI, they kind of didn't believe him, but they ended up deciding to send this information over to the FBI in the area because he was in Kansas City, and this was in Kirtland, Ohio, this barn with the family. And the family, by the way, they're called the Avery family. The FBI there, they contact the local police, the Kirtland Police Department, and they tell them, this information. And turns out that this police department, they already knew about Jeff and his cult, and they had been to the property before, so they took it seriously. They go there and they realize no one is there, and so they end up getting a warrant and they're able to dig in the barn. And once they start digging, immediately they say they didn't even get past a couple inches before this horrible, wretched, rotten smell hit them. It was so bad that they were running out of the barn, barfing, and then going back inside, digging some more, and barfing and digging. It was bad. So as they kept digging, all of a sudden the hole began filling with this red water, and they realized that that was blood. And As if that wasn't bad enough, they started to see personal belongings that were buried, like that belonged to children, like kids' drawings and notebooks and stuff like that. So they end up stopping once they hit a human body of an adult male. They call the FBI and it becomes this huge thing. The next day, they had different law enforcement agencies join the excavation because they needed to use better equipment and they had to dig really carefully because they didn't want to disturb the evidence. They end up finding the entire family in that pit, just like Keith Johnson said, and they identified them as Dennis Avery, his wife Cheryl Avery, and their three daughters, 15-year-old Trina, 13-year-old Rebecca, and 7-year-old Karen, based on what Keith Johnson said, that these are the cult members. So it was Jeff Lundgren, the cult leader, his wife Alice, his son Damon, and a bunch of other people. It was like 13 arrest warrants were issued. Right after that, a lot of the members turned themselves into police, hoping that they would get some sort of break by doing that and trying to get like a plea deal and wanting to talk. But there were a few members who were still on the run, 2 members and the leader himself, Jeff, his wife Alice, his adult son Damon, and then also some of their Alice and Jeff's younger kids were there too. The cops didn't really know where to look, and if it wasn't for the cult leader making the mistake of calling his mother-in-law, who knows when they would have found them. What ended up happening was it was all over the news that they were looking for this cult leader. So
Look, she has the exact same fucking living room that I have with the same TV. She's got the same TV with the same fucking living room. She's smart. It's the same couch, even almost. It's even almost the same couch. I want to date this girl. I think she's actually fucking amazing.
Jeff
And she's maybe too young for me, maybe.
called his mother-in-law.
Probably, yeah, I'd guess maybe about 12 years younger than me or something.
And told her to
Maybe too young.
come pick up the younger kids. And he didn't tell her exactly where he was. He just said, I want you to drive towards San Diego. And then when you get to San Diego, call this number. So the mother-in-law also heard the news about this whole thing and that he was wanted and murders and all that. So what she ends up doing is calling the cops and telling them what happened, and they take that phone number that Jeff gave her and they trace it to a motel that's just like a couple miles from the border of Mexico, like really, really down south in California. They go there, and all of a sudden, there's like a bunch of FBI agents and cops, and they're all going to this motel, and that's when they see Jeff in a phone booth, like near the lobby of the hotel. They surround the phone booth. They pull Jeff out. One of the officers like puts a gun to his head and is like, you are under arrest for murder. They go to his motel room, and there they find his wife and his adult son Damon, as well as the younger kids. After that, when they search the room, they're horrified to find out just how many weapons were there, and like so many different like rifles and machine guns and pistols, and then ammo, tons of ammo. Then they found a key to a locker, like a storage unit, and they found even more ammo there, more weapons, and just like tons of gunpowder and stuff. So they were like, oh my gosh, thank God we were able to get them the way we did, because if it turned into some sort of like standoff, there would have been so much bloodshed, because it looks like they were not about to go down without a fight, and they were capable. Some of the weapons that Jeff had were the same types of weapons that the FBI agents had. So it just was going to be bad. At this point, there are still 2 cult members that are at large, Kathy and Danny. They ended up getting arrested a few days after Jeff and his family, when they were also at a motel in San Diego, just a different one, and the housekeeper at that motel was cleaning their room when she found a crazy amount of ammo and guns, and she also found these documents, identification type documents, and she recognized the pictures in these documents as the two people that were still on the run, because again, it was all over the news at the time. So she calls the cops and they end up arresting them. And so now they've got every cult member arrested. What I want to talk about now is how we got here, the whole entire story, because when these people started talking, it was insane. Remember how I told you in the beginning that like when I looked into it, I kind of felt bad for him. Okay, this is why. So Jeff, he grew up in Missouri, Independence, Missouri, and he was part of the RLDS Church. This is like a denomination of the LDS Church or the Mormon Church, Church of the Latter-day Saints, Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But the RLDS is the reorganized Latter-day Saints, Church of whatever. Oh my God, I can't talk today. Can I talk ever? Now, his father was abusive, okay? His father was, everyone says this, Jeff and the neighbors, people who knew him when he was growing up, they said that basically his father was kind of like, he was a dick. He would belittle Jeff, humiliate him in front of people, and then also his punishments were really severe for little small infractions that like every kid would do. And this was a relentless thing that his father did all the time. And so people kind of felt sorry for Jeff growing up. Then Jeff also autopilot jumping. But this is where it's interesting. He wasn't like a loner and had low self-esteem, at least not on the face of it. Everyone said he was an arrogant loner. It's kind of like the way he dealt with his father belittling him is to have like delusions of grandeur, to like pump himself up, kind of. But then it started to get disturbing because neighbors also said that he was basically torturing animals, right? Which is like the number one serial killer red flag. One neighbor said that he witnessed Jeff when he was young capture this little rabbit, nail it to a piece of wood, and just like beat it to death. And so everyone was like, okay, stay away from this guy. And Jeff was like, I don't even want to hang out with you guys anyway, so whatever. And then when Jeff was a teenager, he became really close with his dad. When his dad decided that he was going to teach him things about hunting and firearms and like survival. And so they would spend a lot of time together in the woods. And by the time that Jeff graduated high school, he was like an expert survivalist. Like he knew all the things to be able to survive in the wild, really good with guns and hunting and that kind of stuff.
That's like my friend Jed.
So he graduates high school and he decides to go to college. He goes to this college in Missouri and he majors in
docking permission requested. Docking request accepted. Docking permission requested.
Electronics.
Autopilot disabled.
When Jeff goes to college, he doesn't live on campus in the dorms. Instead, he goes to this youth house for RLDS church members. And it's at this youth house that he meets Alice Keeler, his future wife. Now, Alice also grew up in the RLDS. Obviously, that's why she was in the youth home. And guess what? She was also abused by her father. Her father was fine for the longest time, but then he got sick. He had MS, multiple sclerosis. No, I really can't talk. I mean, I never could, but especially today. He had MS, and this caused him to stay at home all the time and take all these medications, and then he became angry, and basically he would take out his frustrations on his daughter Alice and his other kids and beat them and yell at them and stuff like that. So when Jeff and Alice meet, they hit it off right away because they can relate and they become really, really close. There's also another guy who went to the same college and lived in the same youth house as them, who was also obviously part of the RLDS, and that is, guess who? Keith Johnson. Remember the guy in the beginning that I told you told the FBI about these murders? Yeah. He went to college with them too. So they all become really close, but Jeff and Alice in particular are extremely close. It develops into a romantic relationship, and Alice gets pregnant. They decide to drop out of college. Now, this really upset her parents. They were so mad that they did not attend her wedding because after he got her pregnant, they got married. And so she was on her own and pregnant. And so now Jeff decides, well, I need to get a job to support her. So he decides to join the Navy. This was in 1970. Remember the Vietnam War. So he ends up serving in the Vietnam War in the Navy, doing like electrical things. I'm sure there's a term for that. Hold on. What do they call it? I seem to not understand anything about electrical things. Electronics technician. He was an electronics technician in the Navy. So Alice then gives birth to their son Damon. When this happens, Jeff wants to leave the military. Like, he asks for early release, and he says that his family need his presence and they can't survive without him being there. And the military, they're like, no, we don't agree. Like, everyone else has a family too that they're away from. Like, no, you don't get to leave early. And so it wasn't until 1974 when Jeff was honorably discharged. When he gets discharged, he comes home and Alice gets pregnant right away. He has a very hard time holding down a job. Whatever money he makes, he's spending irresponsibly. On top of that, he's cheating on Alice. And then the reason why he couldn't hold down a job is because he kept stealing from his job. Like, every employer that he had, pretty much he stole from them. And so what would happen is that he would get fired, he would get mad, he would come home, he would beat his wife, he would then spend the money that he made or stole on shit that the family doesn't need, stuff just for him, irresponsible stuff, cheat, and rinse and repeat. Making matters worse was that he kept getting Alice pregnant. So they had like 4 kids. It got so bad at one point that Alice had to get hospitalized because he pushed her down the stairs and she ruptured her stomach. Even though Jeff was cheating, stealing, beating his wife, and all of that, he considered himself a devout Christian.
They always do.
To develop, okay, his own way of interpreting the scripture. This is the Book of Mormon. It's called Ecclesiastic. Chiasmus. This chiasmus method of interpretation is this old Hebrew way of interpreting like ancient poetry, but of course Jeff said he invented it, of course, right? For example, one sentence says that you look for a lion and he came as a lamb. Now we look for a lamb, but he will come as a lion. And so this repetition meant that it was a true statement, or the sentence in between that was true, and if it wasn't mirrored like that, it was a lie. And so this allowed him to really come up with crazy interpretations of the scripture, that really he would end up using that to do some crazy shit.
But the fact is that the Lord speaks very harshly upon those who will not hear his voice. He was constrained by the Spirit, and it was undeniable that it was time to begin to clean house. And it says in the scriptures, both in the New Testament, the Old Testament, upon your house it will begin. Judgment will begin upon your house. And within my house it began.
He was also upset with the RLDS church because he felt like it was too liberal, that it was giving women too many rights. They allowed women to obtain the priesthood in the Mormon church, which was like not typical of other denominations of Mormonism. I don't know why I said that weird. This ends up with him having his own study sessions at home where he teaches this interpretive method.
We had different classes. These classes were basically to reestablish and reaffirm very strongly in our minds that there was such a thing as a pattern, and that the pattern was true. But the basic precept was that if you use the pattern, you can't err. You absolutely cannot flaw in that.
People, for some reason, believe him, okay? To the point where they're donating money to him. They're like, wow, he is the truth, he is the way. He needs support. And so he immediately is like, oh, wait a minute, I can make money from this. You know how he doesn't like to work, he likes to steal. This is the beginning of his cult. So now he has this small group of believers or followers, whatever you want to call it, and they are donating to him, but he starts to get greedy. He's like, this is not enough money. I need more, and I need it now. Remember, he's in Missouri now. He tells them that he interpreted the scripture, and it is telling him that he needs to go to Kirtland, Ohio. And the reason why he said Ohio is because he said it was mirrored, like OHIO, like the two O's at the end. I don't know, it was mirrored, whatever. He said that, but also there's this place, Kirtland, Ohio, that already has like a lot of Mormon history and temples there and stuff. He knew that there would be a pool there of people that he could recruit essentially to his group cult, whatever you want to call it. He and his wife and kids, they go to Ohio. When he gets there, he goes to the Kirtland Temple, okay, the Mormon temple there. And when he goes there, they offer him a job basically as a tour guide. And the compensation is very little. It's like $500 a month, but they give him free room and board. So he was like, perfect. So he's giving tours there. And when he gives these tours, he's telling the people about this method.
You can't
where
speak.
The mirror thing.
You don't have a
chiasmus,
lot of.
whatever the hell. So he tells them that, and some of them.
She doesn't have the gift of gabs. She chose a very interesting job, but she's good at this.
Like, oh my God, what? Cool, I love it. He's already building a new following in Ohio, but also, what is he doing? He's stealing, of course. He's taking donations that he gets in the tour, as well as money that he sees coming in from other areas, and he ends up stealing, they say, between $25,000 to $40,000. It's a big range, but that's what I found, like, repeatedly. The church eventually notices at the end of the year when they're like, where the hell is the money? They couldn't even cover some of their basic costs because it was such a drastic decline in their income, and they look into it and they find out that Jeff is stealing. So they tell him, get out. He's fired and leave now. So he ends up getting this farm with the money that he has, but he tries to convince, and he doesn't just try to, he convinces the people that he was talking to during this tour that he was having come to his place when he still worked at the temple and teaching them this method. He tells them, listen, I'm leaving. I'm gonna have this farm. Come live with me and I will take care of you. And so they do that. And as part of them living with him, they give him their money that they make. And so now he's got income coming from his followers. During this time, he also starts contacting the followers that he had in Missouri and telling them, hey, I have this farm in Ohio. I've got people here who live with me, who are following the truth and the way and his interpretations. Like, sell your house, come here, give me the money, you can live with me, I'll take care of everything, and we can all be a happy family. And so they did that, actually. And every night he would have these classes where he would teach them the interpretations. There was one family, the Avery family. They are the ones that end up getting murdered. They knew Jeff and Alice from Missouri. Now, Jeff always talks shit about Dennis Avery all the time because Dennis's wife, Cheryl, would, have an opinion, God forbid. And to him, this was just a sin. And he found Dennis to be weak because he allowed his wife to have an opinion. Can you believe this shit? And so he would basically talk shit about them. When Jeff called the Avery family and told Dennis, hey, sell your house in Missouri and come down here with me. And then Dennis did that. Alice was surprised because she's like telling Jeff, why would you tell the Avery family to come join us? Like, don't you hate them? And Jeff is like, I want their money. And Alice is like, oh, okay, I get it. When the Avery family did sell their home in Missouri and come to Ohio, they actually did not give them all the money. What ended up happening was this. They sold the family. Oh, geez. They sold the home in Missouri for $19,000. This is in the 80s, but that seems very, very affordable. Anyway, so they sell this home, and instead of living with Jeff and giving him all the money, Dennis Avery gives Jeff $10,000, so more than half, but he gets his own little home and keeps the $9,000 for himself and his family. This upset Jeff. He felt like Dennis was slighting him. So now we come to a new phase in the manipulation. Jeff starts convincing his followers that he could basically like read their minds, and that he's not just Jeff Lundgren, he is a prophet. Okay, and so the way that he convinced them that he could read their minds is that he would eavesdrop on them and basically spy on them in his home, and then say things to them later about the things he overheard that made them think that he could read their mind. Okay, I don't know, it worked. And then he started to create like rules, and they kept getting stricter and stricter. He banned them from talking to each other, and he would call it murmuring. So they could only speak to him, but not to each other, which is weird. Then it became sexual, right? Which always happens. And this is when he tried to like humiliate the men and degrade the women and get them to express their loyalty to him. He had this thing like a dancing ceremony where he had the women get naked and dance, and then he quote cleansed them with his seed. And then this article that I found, it literally said that he would send them back to their husbands with quote soiled underwear to humiliate the husbands, and then he would have the husbands who were dressed in like full military fatigues take an oath of loyalty to him, which by the way he also made the women do when they were dancing naked. They would take an oath of loyalty to him. I don't know why they did it. Honestly, I don't, but they did it. After this though, there was a member who couldn't handle it. His name was Kevin Curry. He was like, you know what, I'm out. This is too much for me, can't do it. He leaves, basically escapes. Word started to spread in the area about this cult and what they were doing, and it gets back to the Kirtland Temple where he got fired from, right? And they find out what he's doing, and they end up excommunicating him from the church in 1987. And this is when Jeff gets upset. So he starts ramping it up. He tells them that he had a vision that the second coming of Christ was near, and that he got 2 specific dates, and he tells them these dates. And so this kind of renews their motivations to stay, because the whole time he's promising them, you know, that they're going to see God and witness the second coming and be part of it and go to heaven and blah, blah, blah. The dates, they come and they go and nothing happens. And yikes, what do you do now? So that's when he says, I misinterpreted my vision. My vision actually stated that we have to take over the temple, the Kirtland Temple where he got fired. Yeah, they have to take that over, and they have to sacrifice the officials of that church, because Jesus is mad that they've been making these changes and letting women become priests and all this awful stuff. So Jesus wants us to go kill them, take it over, and then he's gonna come back. Sorry, I misinterpreted that. Then he says, oh, by the way, we have to do this by a very specific date, and that date, can you guess what the date is? Well, it's May 3rd, but can you guess the significance of May 3rd? It's his birthday. Yeah, they had to do it by his birthday, because remember, he's a prophet. He's also a Taurus. So remember that guy, Kevin Curry, the cult member that I told you left and couldn't take it? Well, he comes back. He does. I don't know why, but he came back. Now Jeff is like really feeling good. He's like, this guy came back, and he's telling them we need to take over this temple. He starts creating almost like these training camps for his cult members to train for this attack on the Kirtland Temple. Now it's February 1988, just a few months before their planned attack. Kevin Curry, the guy who left and came back, he leaves again, this time for good. And when he leaves, he goes to the authorities and he tells them about this planned attack on the temple. This is when Jeff gets on the local authorities' radar. They start spying on him, essentially looking into his past. This is where they find out about him stealing from this temple,
Moving to
he got
Stargate.
fired from there,
Warp drive
and
active.
that he has these people living with him, so that they're basically a cult, right? And they decide to confront him about this attack. They call him into the police station and they tell him, listen, we've been watching you, we've been getting word that you're going to do this attack, you better not do this attack. So Jeff goes back to his followers and he tells them that he's calling off the attack. He goes, wait a minute, I got a vision. Like, it's not the temple we need to attack, it's the Avery family.
Approaching
The Avery
Stargate.
family, they didn't live there, so they were not as quote unquote obedient to Jeff because they were a little bit detached. So when he would have these nightly scripture lessons, Dennis Avery would question him sometimes, which was a big no-no. And not only that, but he kind of was defiant in the sense that he didn't live with him and he wasn't giving him all the money, which already pissed Jeff off. And now he was starting to question his interpretations. And so he makes them the enemy. He starts having these meetings without the Avery family and telling the other followers that basically they're sinners, that all the problems that this group goes through, somehow he connects it back to Dennis Avery and his family. And he says the wife is so unruly and disobedient, and the kids, she's not even rearing them correctly. Look at them running and laughing. We had to kill them all.
Autopilot
And
jumping.
after we kill them, we're gonna go into the wilderness, and that's when we're gonna see God. He manages to convince the group to kill the Avery family, that they're essentially a sacrifice to usher in
Moving
the
to
second
Stargate.
coming. And somehow
drive
they agree.
active.
I don't know. They say they were afraid, but debatable. Anyway, I mean, not that they're not afraid, but like some of the members were able to leave. So I don't feel like it was impossible to leave. For whatever reason, they wanted to stay, and they said, okay, we're gonna do this. So now he starts stockpiling even more weapons and ammo. He's constantly walking around in military fatigues with a loaded pistol and trying to instill fear in the group. Alice and Jeff, they go to the Avery's home and they start basically like casing their joint in terms of like looking at their belongings and deciding the things that they were going to take after they kill them. Just nasty. Then they tell the Avery family, we're going to go on this trip to the wilderness and we need you to like pack up and take all your stuff, bring it over to the farm because we're going to go on this camping trip. And then Jeff tells Cheryl, Dennis Avery's wife, to write a letter to her parents in Wyoming and tell them, he tells her to write a letter to her parents and tell them that she is going to Wyoming because Dennis got a job and they need to move to Wyoming right away, and that basically don't expect to hear from us anytime soon. So he's already setting it up. Also, it's around this time that, remember Keith Johnson, the guy that he met when he was in college, who's the one who ends up telling police about these murders? He calls him up and tells him, hey, like, I have this group and we're doing this, come join, because remember he lost a couple followers. So
Autopilot
Keith
jumping.
and his wife Kathy decide to sell their home in Missouri, come and live with Jeff in Ohio as part of this whole thing. Okay, this would end up being the biggest mistake they could have made. 2 months after Keith and his wife Kathy joined the group is when the murders take place. Now it's a week before the murders. Jeff tells Keith, the new guy, the guy who's going to snitch on him, and another guy called Ron to start digging this huge pit in the barn. This is where the Avery family would end up being buried. It's the big day, April 17th, 1989. Dennis and Cheryl come with all their things to the farm, and they end up having this dinner at 6:30 p.m., like the Last Supper, okay? Everyone other than the Avery family knew what was going to happen, that they were about to sacrifice this entire family. And that's when Jeff tells all the men, other than Dennis, to come to his bedroom. Then they're all sitting there together. He pulls out his pistol and he tells them all, are you in? And one by one, they all say, yes, they're in, yes, they're in, they're in. like, let's kill this family. And so they start coming up with the protocol, which basically is that they're all going to go to the barn. Ron is going to go and get the family one by one, starting with Dennis, then his wife, then the kids, in order of age. Lastly, they're going to get the youngest one, and they're going to bring them into the barn, tie them up, throw them in the pit, and Jeff is going to shoot them. So part of the plan was that Jeff's wife, Alice, would leave before any of this happened, so she was out shopping while this was all going down. The women
Docking permission
were in
requested.
the home to distract
Docking
the family
permission
so that
requested.
Ron could bring them out one by one. Greg, his job was to stand outside of the barn and rev the chainsaw at the time that Jeff would start
Docking
shooting,
permission
so that
requested.
people wouldn't hear. Jeff looks at Ron and he says,
Docking
let's
request
do it,
accepted.
and they go. All the men go into the barn. Ron goes to the house and he tells
Autopilot
them, hey,
disabled.
can you come with me
Waypoint
to
reached.
the barn? I need to gather some items and prepare them for this camping trip. So Dennis is like, okay. He comes in to the barn with Ron, and as soon as he comes in there, Ron pulls out a stun gun and he like zaps Dennis with it, but the voltage is too low to actually like immobilize him, but it hurts. So Dennis starts screaming and he says, no, this isn't necessary. Please, this isn't necessary. God damn it, God damn it, God damn it. And that's when all the men run towards, except for Jeff, run towards Dennis, and they start like subduing him and tying him up. They carry him and they put him into the pit. His hands and feet are bound and he has duct tape across his mouth, but his eyes are not covered, and he sees that Jeff is standing there over him on a pile of dirt and pulls out his gun. Greg revs the chainsaw. Jeff shoots him twice. After he shoots Dennis, Jeff calls all the men to where the pit is and he makes them look down. He tells them, you'd better see what this looks like. All the men look. They don't really say anything except for his son, Damon. He starts crying hysterically, screaming, crying, everything like that, to the point where they decided that they couldn't let him be involved in like subduing the members of the Avery family and putting them in the pit anymore. They said he should just be the lookout.
Oops.
Because he was so hysterical. After that, Ron leaves the barn, goes to the house,
Autopilot
tells
engaged.
Cheryl, hey, we need you in the barn. Dennis needs your help with something. She's like, okay. She gets into the barn again.
Moving to Stargate.
Ron tries to
Warp
zap her
drive
with a stun gun.
active.
Same thing. It doesn't really immobilize her, and she's freaking out. And that's when he puts his hand on her shoulder and he says, just give it up. It'll be easier this way. Just let go. And they say that Cheryl just completely submitted, didn't move, let them tie her up, put her in the pit. She sees Dennis, her husband, is dead next to her in the pit, and Jeff shoots her three times, twice in the chest and one in the stomach. She falls, dies. Of course, during this time, Greg revved the chainsaw.
Approaching Stargate.
After that, again, Ron goes back to the house and he gets the eldest daughter. She's 15 years old. Her name is Trina. And he tells her, we need you in the barn. And she's like, okay. So he brings her into the barn, and they say that it was similar to Cheryl, where she was kind of confused at first, but when she realized what was happening, she didn't fight back. She just stood completely still. They tie her up, they throw her in the pit, and she sees both of her parents are dead. Jeff again shoots her several times. He tried to shoot her once in the head, but it grazed her head and she kind of screamed. And then he shot her again. And although she wasn't dead, she was like writhing in pain and making these sounds. They never fired like a mercy shot. They let her sit there and struggle, which is awful. It was time for the next kid. Again, Ron goes, and there's two little kids, a 13-year-old Becky and 7-year-old Karen. And he's like, who wants to ride a horse? And they're both like, we want to go, whoa, we want to go. So he's like, well, I'll take Becky first. She's older. So he like puts her on his back, like piggyback, takes her into the barn. All the men there, besides Jeff and his son Damon,
Moving to Stargate.
tie her up, but they make it seem
Warp
like it's a game.
active.
Like, oh, we're playing a game, tie her up, throw her in the pit. At that point, she sees her dead family. She gets shot twice too. And now it's time for the youngest one. At this point, she's in there and she's crying, I want my mommy, I want my mommy. The women that are there distracting are like, you'll see her soon. Then Ron shows up, puts her on the piggyback as well, takes her into the barn. They all do the playing the game of tying you up. Put this little 7-year-old girl in the pit, shoots her. Jeff shoots her and she dies instantly.
Approaching
then he says
Stargate.
to the other members, like, pour lime and cover this with dirt. And they do that. Then after that, he's like, time for my scripture class. And so they say that like no one was talking. They were all like sad and quiet. And at the end of the session, he asks them, okay, is there anything that you guys have to say about what happened tonight? And that's when Keith says, no one should have to die that way. And Jeff's response was, it had to be done. It was God's will. So now it's the day after, and they're preparing to leave to go to the wilderness to see God. And all of a sudden, a bunch of cops and FBI agents show up.
What?
And they're freaking out. They think that they know what happened. Turns out they don't. They're still trying to figure out like if they're going to do the attack in May, and they're coming to ask the cult members, are you here willingly?
Autopilot jumping.
On the temple. They had no idea that they had just murdered the Avery family. And so all the cult members are like, yes, we're here willingly. No, we've never heard of an attack. We don't understand what you're talking about.
Hoping to
And so
Stargate.
they end up
Warp drive
leaving. Nothing
active.
happens, but they're freaked out. They think that they're onto them or something. And so in the middle of the night, they all leave. They end up going to West Virginia and set up camp like in the wilderness. And it's in West Virginia where shit gets even crazier, because Jeff is now almost on this high, right? He feels like he's got more control. He just got away with murder, and he starts making them even more submissive towards him. And
Approaching
he decides
Stargate.
not only is he going to cleanse the women with his seed in front of their husbands, but he's actually going to take them as his wives. So they don't go back to their husbands after that. They're his wife. He takes Kathy as his second wife. Keith, that's his wife. And this was the last straw for Keith. Not murdering an entire family, including kids, right? That wasn't the last straw for him. It was Jeff taking his wife that sent him over the edge. This is when he decides to leave. He basically escapes. And at first, though, he doesn't go to police. He wouldn't go to police for months. He was more concerned with making sure he didn't get caught. So he goes to Buffalo, New York, and he's just hiding. So at this point, the group is also running out of money, and they can't stay in the woods in West Virginia anymore.
Autopilot
So
jumping.
Kathy, Jeff's new second wife, she had a friend in Missouri who had a farm, and this friend was willing to let Jeff and the cult live there. So they decide, okay, let's go there. They
Moving
go there
to
for a month.
Stargate. Warp
But
drive
again,
active.
they realize that they need money. Like they have a home, but they still need money. So Jeff tells the group, listen, we're going to separate. He tells all the men to get jobs, save that money, and then they're all going to get back together in the spring. And guess what? Guess what's going to happen in the spring? They're going to see God, because you know what didn't happen in the wilderness that he told them would happen was that the Jesus was going to come back. It's going to be the end of the world. That never happened. It's been a while now, and that's not been happening. So at this point, when he tells them we're all going to separate and tells the men
Approaching
to get jobs,
Stargate.
they all see this as their break, right? To get away from him, because they don't believe him anymore. They're like, this is bullshit. It is at this point when Jeff realizes they're not coming back because he can't reach them, and they're not reaching out to him or anything. And so he freaks out. He's like, okay, not only did they abandon me, but I'm pretty sure they're now going to go to the cops and tell them what happened. So he
Yeah, right. All
freaks
those
out.
murderers are going to
He
go
goes
to the
with
cops.
his wife.
They say they're going to be like, oh, the cult leader told us to do it, but we just, like, the 5 of us just slaughtered a whole family, and it's the cult leader's fault somehow. They're not going to do that. They're not going to go to the fucking cops. They killed a whole family. Like, who's gonna do that? They know what the charge is. It's the chair. They're gonna get they're gonna get the chair. None of those people, if they're pussy enough to kill an entire family, they're too pussy to take the charge. I guarantee it.
his son Damon, the other kids that they have, as well as those 2 other members that I told you about.
Autopilot
Danny
jumping.
and his second wife, Kathy. And they all go to California, San Diego. And that's where they're hiding. Keep in mind,
They all stay in the same place, which is
Kathy,
stupid.
right, the new wife, second
Moving to
wife, whatever,
Stargate.
she's pregnant too.
Warp drive
So it's a
active.
hot mess. And now it's been 8 months since the murder, okay? It's New Year's Eve, 1989, and Keith goes to the FBI. That's when he tells them, I was part of a cult, this guy stole my wife, and we murdered a family. That is the backstory. Now let me tell you what happened with all the members. Almost all the members took plea deals except for Jeff, his wife Alice, his son Damon, and Ron Luff. If you'll remember, he's the one who
Approaching
walked
Stargate.
each of the family members from the house to the barn. First was Alice's trial, and her defense was that she was abused by Jeff and really couldn't leave and had no choice and didn't want to take part in this. And, you know, they presented all that evidence, but the jury took 1 day to come back with guilty on all counts, which she was charged with complicity to commit aggravated murder, which means that she got like 100-something years, and she wouldn't be eligible for parole.
Told you.
Until after she did the 100 years.
If it's
So
not the
basically she
chair,
got
it's
life.
100 years.
Then it was time for Jeff's trial. Okay, everyone thought he was going to plead insanity. He actually didn't, and it was really weird because his defense, they never called any witnesses. They didn't call Jeff, any experts, anything. They basically just said he was confused. He really did think he was a prophet. He really did think he was helping. And that was the defense. And it was crazy because the jury, it only took them 2 hours to come back with guilty on all counts. And when it was time for the sentencing,
Autopilot
Jeff
jumping.
sat there and spoke for 5 hours. They had to listen to him go on for 5 hours. And it took them 2 hours to be like, put him to death, we're done. So that was his sentence.
Moving
And then
to
it was time
Stargate.
for his son
Warp
Damon's
drive
trial.
active.
And Damon, his defense was similar to his mom's, where it was like, I was abused by him, I didn't have a choice, like I was an unwilling participant, I was forced. But they were able to kind of, the prosecution.
So this ends here. So guys, it's 3:13 in the morning. I've been going for 13 hours and 50 minutes, which is usually what I do. It's a little bit longer than I normally do because it's a Saturday, or it was a Saturday night. I'm going to stop now. And I want to say thank you so much for your time. Thank you for tuning in today and watching me play video games and stuff. And so I will be back here tomorrow, probably around like the early afternoon as I usually am, and depending on the weather. And thank you so much for your time. I'm going to stop this video here with a reminder. My website changed today. Welcome to the new website. Click on the cast face to donate. Come to my website, which is skycat.live. It's got all my links and the digits and the info and all that stuff. And click on the cast face to donate. Thank you so much. You guys have a wonderful day, and I love you guys. Thank you for your time. I'm gonna upload videos to my YouTube channel, which, by the way, I have thousands of videos on my YouTube channel. Come check me out. Thank you so much for your time, guys. You have a wonderful day. Goodbye. Oh, and the stream's gonna end here in just 30 seconds, but I've got, or like I don't know, like 5 minutes, but I've got to upload first.